Well, with documentary filmmakers, access is always something that you kind of work hard for. When you fall in love with a subject you want to document or collaborate with. And actually 20 years ago, I asked Declan Donlan if I could film his rehearsal, because I sat in on his rehearsals. He allowed me to sit in. And then I thought, rehearsal is a private world that we never see. And I think lots of filmmakers don't really understand how to work with actors. I certainly feel very naive in that as I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm curious about that. So I'd read Declan's book called The Actor and the Target, which is a kind of, I think it was it Jeremy Strong who said that it was one of the 10 things he couldn't live without. So, he's got this insight into performance. So 20 years ago I said, let's make a rehearsal film. And he said, no, it's too fragile and it's too difficult for the actors when you've got a production coming on down the line. So then 20 years later, they contacted me, Cheek by Jowl Theatre Company. Declan Donlan and his work and life partner, Nick Ormerod, have been making theatre for 40 years. And they were suddenly curious to collaborate on a workshop. They said, we've been doing these workshops, we've got this idea of 4 Macbeths, 4 Lady Macbeths, and exploring the text and his method of working with actors. So it's not really a film about Macbeth, it's a film about acting. That's why the title is Acting. It was great after 20 years to make a film that I'd been curious to make for a long time. Well, with acting, you can be there are a set of assumptions, possibly, about character. Like, you have to know your character, and what does my character do? What do they say? What would they do? And then sort of having a plan, as it were, around a character, or the Meisner technique, which is to sort of, cry about your dog and then have real tears. There are different approaches to acting. There are really, eminent directors, Stanislavski. I mean, I think in theatre, that's really where actors learn their craft, I mean, for industrialized TV, it's not quite the same. The demands aren't the same. Obviously, I have 2 actor brothers, and I go and see them in these productions, like Joe in Dear England, and I think, how do they do that every night? 10 performances a week. But I think if you are an actor, you're constantly fascinated by what happens. And live acting is, you have to let go of those plans about character, and that's what Declan helps actors understand, and that's what you see in the film, that you can't act with insurance policies around what you think the character is. You've got to kind of confront what the character sees, see what the character sees, and that's going to come from who you are as much as the text. And the text is almost like the sort of, in Shakespeare certainly, it's the sort of thoroughbred that's taking you down this kind of, stream of thought that each character's having. And so the film is unpacking some key ways of thinking about acting, and Declan himself is actually extremely funny. He's a kind of performer in his own way, or he certainly understands how to communicate. So what drew me was my own learning. I mean, for me, this is a kind of process film. It's a learning film. And I think we're never done with learning, so that's what drew me to it. Well, we shot it over 11 days. The workshop was held over 11 days, and the actors were finding places that they would work on various scenes, and it was completely, just according to what scenes they were working on, and some exercises that Declan does with them. And then I realised I shot the whole film myself. I edited the whole film myself. In these days where funding is hard to come by, if you can be like a one-person band doing as many of the tasks as possible, it's possible to actually make a film. So, what was interesting was that for me was to be embedded within the ensemble with the camera, an easy rig. So I'm moving around within it and thinking about editing. Shooting and editing is, they're so related. And then I realised that, for the audience, they've got to understand the dramatic stakes in each scene, and that's only going to really be apparent if you're in the drama of the play itself. So then I realised that I would cut it to the chronology and narrative of the play. So you get the play, you get a sort of meta Macbeth, but you get multiple actors, multiple pairs of the Macbeths doing the same scene. So you see what happens with the text, with different actors, different bodies, different beings. So that's exciting because, film really does work through contrast. It's a sort of key thing that you discover in, that contrast is always exciting. So the contrast between the different actors' performances and then the sort of shattering takeaway of Macbeth, which is something so terrifyingly human, which is this guilt and what you do. Why do people do what they do? And why do the Macbeths do what they do? And as Lady Macbeth says at the end, what's done cannot be undone. And it's this frightening confrontation with actually the act in life of what you do that you can't undo. So I think that because the actors were wonderfully responsive, and for them it was exciting to work with Declan. So the edit of the film is also slowly allowing more of their scenes to happen for longer. So as I'm playing it, it's over a year of cutting to really discover the film. I always say to myself and to the students that I work with, because I also teach creative documentary at UCL in the public anthropology department, which is interesting because actually all of this is anthropology. Film is anthropology in many ways. But it's this thing that the material knows more than I know. It's like I have to understand what the material can do, the footage. So you have an idea about structure, and then it's like you discover. So I have to be a bit like the actors. So every creative process probably is the same in the sense that Declan talks about, that you have to see what's happening in front of you, respond to it. So, yeah. No, I think that the actors were, sort of excited to be there. And when I'm shooting, I always need to, it's something that you can't sort of describe or tell, but you have to always create a safe space for the fact that it's not a camera in the room, it's Sophie in the room, I'm in the room, and I'm here, and I'm responding, and I'm seeing what you're doing. And so that's less of a problem. The real problem is simply the culture of how to make it possible to make a film at all. That's the real problem. You end up having to make a lot of sacrifices and take a lot of risks. But when you believe in a subject and it's just so darn exciting to kind of learn this, it's like, I'm like a pig in shit with the material. But the hard thing is, how to get finance to make it possible to make a film at all. I think the surprise for me is that the film's really moving at the end, that it's not just a sort of didactic kind of, instruction. It's actually kind of shattering, that the acting gets there in these very kind of, very direct encounters with the director. There's lots of fourth wall breaking, so you never quite know whether it's going to be just instructional, whether it's actually going to affect you. But the Shakespeare text, because you get this pleasure in the repetition of it. So if you go to see Shakespeare, and the actors are kind of moving on, but here you kind of get to revisit certain scenes. So the language has its own magic, really. And I think the surprise was that it was possible for it to be something that you kind of gain a lot of insight, and that sort of part of your brain that's sort of intellectual or kind of, I don't know, the right, left brain. I'm dyslexic, so I always get it wrong anyway. But, you get really caught into the characters, and that relationship between someone talking in the room saying, can you do this, to suddenly these people becoming these characters, that slippage was really exciting to discover. And, in testing the footage in the edit, I actually tested it with my students and, got feedback from them. And I could feel that that's the excitement, is to see people become someone else, go in and out of that. Well, Edinburgh is one of the first festivals I ever brought my work to, with one of my first feature documentary, Hoover Street Revival. I brought it to Edinburgh, and in fact, before that, even the short I made, Lars from 1 to 10, was in Edinburgh. So I've got a strong love of Edinburgh Film Festival, and coming here in August was really exciting. And, I know Paul Ridd from when he was at Picture House. He actually was responsible for theatrical distribution at Picture House of the Slavoj Žižek film I made, The Pervert's Guide to Ideology. He could see that there was an audience for that. So it's exciting, because I think Paul really does understand audiences. And, when we make films, we do make them for audiences, and we believe they're there as filmmakers. And it's exciting when you're in a festival or you're working with distributors who are excited to create the habitat for audiences to come and to make that clear what it is, not like chasing everyone so they're all running away, but actually creating a strong habitat with a certain confidence. And I think the Edinburgh Film Festival's got a confidence about what it is and what it's trying to do now, which is fantastic. It's great to be here. I'm thrilled.